If you look at any of the holy books, the question of leadership is one that is at the very heart of it. Those of you who are assembled here who are Christians will remember the many times that the question of leadership has come to the fore. Many of you have read the story of great leaders in the Bible, such as Abraham, such as Moses, such as David, and many others. Those of you who are familiar with other civilizations will also recognize that leadership has preoccupied the minds of men. Indeed, within the continent of Africa, despite the difficulties that we have had to go through, leadership has always been at the back of our mind. And one can go into history. One can go into the history of Africa before she was colonized. And one will remember, whether you are talking about the Zulu of South Africa, or you are talking about the Ovambo and the Ovimbundu of Angola, or the Akan of Ghana, or the Yoruba of Nigeria, that the question of leadership has remained alive and well. Even when other civilizations crossed seas and oceans to come to this continent, and they enslaved us, there were leaders who rose. They may have been overwhelmed. Our kith and kin may have been taken from the shores of the continent of Africa into other parts of the world, but we never stopped leading. And when slavery lost its luster and other civilizations once again sat in Berlin in 1884 and 1885 and divided our continent into what we now call the 55 countries of Africa, our leaders were never, ever lost. The leaders were there, and they were clear in their mind that one day we would regain our independence. And I remember so very vividly that even as those other civilizations abused and denigrated the African peoples, Africans never slept through the revolution. They were alive and well and clear that the freedom that had been taken away from them would be regained. I remember so very vividly, courtesy of history, when Africans in the far lands in the Caribbean were thinking about how they would come back to the mother continent to regain their dignity. I can remember the works of great Africans such as Marcus Garvey. I can remember the great works of Africans such as Williams. I can remember the great works of your own South African Pixley Kaisa Kaseme as early as 1906, saying, we shall regenerate Africa. I can remember the voices of great Africans in those early days. I can still hear, even as I stand here, the great words of Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah say, we shall write our own history. I can remember the words of Patrice Emery Lumumba saying, we shall regain our independence. I can remember the conviction of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. I can remember the words of Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, reminding us that there is only one race, the human race. I can remember.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, Africans. I hope you're doing fine where you are, and if you're not doing fine, please do fine where you are. You know, they say that if you don't know who you are, chances of becoming who you are not are very high. If you don't know yourself, people can create versions and make you live up to their versions. One person will come and say, you are a teacher. You'll become a teacher. Another one will come and say, you're a politician. You become a politician. Another one comes and say, you're a traitor. You become a traitor. Because believe me when I tell you one thing, words have power. Actions have consequences. Even when God was creating the world, he spoke things into being. We are told that the word became flesh. So there's power in the word. Be careful of what versions of people, or rather be careful of being yourself, and be careful that nobody comes and tells you who you are not and you live to become that person. This always happens mostly when you show that you don't know who you are, when someone has brainwashed your mind, when someone has really oppressed you. It's a psychological issue that happens. For this case, it is Africa I'm speaking about. I'm speaking of the African people, the African culture. We are living in a culture where you put on an African shirt, an African attire, an African shoe, and you walk down the streets. People think you got no sense of fashion. We are living in a culture where you speak fluent mother tongue, you speak fluent African languages, but then you can't speak fluent English or French or Portuguese, any of those European languages. People say you are illiterate. That is how we live today. We've come into this world speaking words that are connotatively, or rather denotatively, European, throwing away our African side of that thing. We have certain objects. We refrain from calling them with their African names, and we call them with their European names. An argument was made by Plo Lumumba where he said that in Africa, we've learned even to westernize food. For example, we have chips, the sliced potatoes and being fried. You slice potato and you fry them. In Kiswahili, we call them vibanzi. Mama, nataka vibanzi. Mom, I want chips. That's the direct translation. But if you come to Nairobi and you say, please give me some vibanzi, people look at you. What are you saying? People think that you are illiterate. You don't know English. But it is only that you prefer using your mother tongue. In Africa, Plo Lumumba again continues to say, in Dar es Salaam, where he made this speech I'm about to show you, these sliced potatoes are being fried on hot oil. And then someone comes and says, please, serve me some French fries. How far is France from Tanzania? Just how far is France from Tanzania? We've refrained from calling them with their own name, own African name, but we go all the way to France and tag it here, that give me some French fries. We have foods that Europeans have named it their own. We have foods that the Brazilians have named it their own. Fogo gaucho is a Brazilian food. But if there was a food that is the same recipe, exact recipe, with the African name, I believe we should call it by that. Because someone might say, Evans, why are you speaking about food? And why are you being petty? This is not a petty issue. The issue here is westernization of our mindset. We have lost our culture and we've become somebody we are not. That is why we follow these Hollywood trends. This is why we follow Hollywood blindly. We don't know who we are. Everyone comes and throws everything at us. Today a man wears a skirt. Tomorrow you will see Africans putting on skirts. Tomorrow a man puts on the earrings and the wigs and the lipstick and the nails. Tomorrow you will see a man doing that. We have this con. A man does con where he puts his manhood into the anus of another man in the movies. And then someone else, an African, says, okay, this is the new trend. I'm going to do this. No. And that's why in Africa we have some things we have refused. That's why in Africa there are things we won't be doing at all. You know what I'm speaking about if you catch my drift. Yep. Now, I want us to listen to Plo Lumumba, listen to his beautiful arguments on this case, and then I shall share with you my further thoughts by the end of the video, where we shall also have a deep, critical analysis. Let's dive in.
I remember that encounter between Moses and God himself. And I remember Moses walking into the mountain of God. And I remember him lamenting and saying, now that you are sending me to the Israelites, what shall I do? And I remember God telling him, and what do you have in your hand? And he says, this is the only thing that I have in my hand. And he says, is that by that rod and staff that you shall liberate the Israelites. Today, as we talk about the devoted citizen, I hear God asking us, what do you have in your hand? God is asking you, what do you have in your hand? What character do you have that you can use to part the Red Seas that are facing us? What do you have in your hand that you can strike the rocks that water may come out? That is the question that is personal to you. Because when you go out of here, you will be asking yourself, what is it that you can do to change your circumstances? And the last time I checked, there is not going to be a nuclear solution to our problems. It is going to be block by block. It is going to be city by city. It is going to be slow and painful, and history has demonstrated that when it is done in that way, then it can last. It is not lost on me that there will be signs and there will be times of pain and sorrow when a forward movement looks like a backward movement, but movement it must be. You know, I remember the great Martin Luther King Jr. talking about leadership and service. And I remember him saying, not in so many words, that when it falls upon your laps to sweep the streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. Sweep the streets like Mozart composed music. Perhaps if he was in Africa, he would have said, sweep the streets like Lucky Dube composed music. Sweep the streets like Femi Anikulapo Kuti composed music. I'm now saying that leadership is leadership everywhere. You know, I remember, because my memory still serves me well. It gladdens my heart that I've been asked to share my thoughts with you on a subject that has remained evergreen throughout the ages, the subject of leadership. Throughout the ages, men have asked, how do we lead ourselves into what we desire? Throughout the ages, men and women have sought to improve their circumstances through leaders. Throughout the ages, leaders of one kind or another have emerged. Throughout the ages, the subject of leadership has been interrogated. And it doesn't matter which civilization one is talking about. Leadership is at the very heart of the affairs of man. I remember in 1982, I was watching a movie which I commend to all of you. The movie Mahatma Gandhi by Sir Richard Attenborough. And I remember, and I invite you to remember with me, one day, the Mahatma goes to his ashram, and he walks into the toilet, and he discovers that the toilet has not been cleaned. And he asks his wife, why has the toilet not been cleaned? And it was your turn to clean the toilet. And the wife tells him, how can I clean the toilet? And there are workers to do it. And the Mahatma tells her, it is all the more reason that you must clean the toilet, because that is true service. Tells him that when all is said and done, perhaps the greatest person in that assembly was the toilet cleaner. I'm urging you that when it falls upon your lap to clean the toilet so clean that people will say, behold, a great toilet cleaner. When it falls upon your lap to be a musician, sing so well that it may be said of you, you are a great singer. Because that is leadership. Leadership is at all levels. Today we think that leadership is only political leadership. But many of those individuals who are in the political arena are truly, quite a number of them, there are few good ones, but many of them are con men and con women. And it's our duty to expose them for who they are. You know, sometimes I look at us in Africa and I ask, courtesy of democracy, we are given the opportunity to vote. And the men and women who want us to vote come to us, seeking our mandate that they may serve us. And they tell us many things. And we believe the things that they tell us. And we vote them into office. And once we vote them into office, we assume that they'll deliver to us. And we go back to sleep. We expect them to preside over the building of our roads. In South Africa, at least don't complain about roads. You have better roads than most of Africa. So let us give credit where credit is due. But you'll tell me you are comparing us with not so good countries, but on the road sector you are doing reasonably well. In other African countries, they don't even do the roads, but they build bridges where there are no rivers. Then we expect them to do our hostels, and they don't do so. I'm urging us today that as a devoted citizen, it is your duty to remain eternally vigilant, because history has demonstrated to us that it is only through eternal vigilance that good things are retained and maintained and sustained. Let us also remember that all that we do as devoted citizens are intergenerational. We are the young men and women singing, we must remember that our duty as devoted citizens is to run our baton. Life is a relay race. You know, history teaches me a lot of things, and I want history to teach you many things. On the 6th day of March, the year 1997, a great African was invited to Accra, Ghana, in the same manner that I'm invited here. That great African was a great Tanzanian, Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere. And when he was invited, he did not have a written speech, but on that day he said he was going to talk about unity. And he spoke and said, we are gathered here 40 years after Ghana regained our independence. And when we are gathered in that manner, we must ask ourselves certain fundamental questions. What have we done with our independence? And he reminded us that when we were seeking independence, we promised ourselves many things. We promised ourselves that we would fight poverty. We promised ourselves that we would fight ignorance and disease. Let us take stock. Have we eliminated poverty? No, we have not, he said. Have we eliminated ignorance? No, we have not. Have we eliminated disease? No, we have not. But let us be fair, he said, to the generation to which I belong. We have run our race. We may have made mistakes. This generation must now ask itself, what can they do to build on what we started? And he said, in the process of trying to do what we promised ourselves, there are many mistakes that may have been made, and we have made our fair share of mistakes. But what mistake we must never make is the mistake of giving up. We must never make the mistake of giving up we must always say that it can be done and it must be done, because if it is not done, then we ourselves will be done. Today, I'm telling us that we have the wherewithal to do it. Sometimes we lament too much. Sometimes we complain too much. Sometimes we quarrel too much. Sometimes we blame too much. Sometimes we think that it's all lost. But I want to tell you that in the struggle for that which is good, there'll be moments of desperation. There'll be moments when you want to give up. There'll be moments when you want to say that it cannot be done. But depression, if it does not become clinical, is useful, because it gives you a moment of useful reflection. So today I'm asking you to remember that it can be done, and you are the people who can do it. For the younger generation, I am asking you to remember these immortal words of Chinua Achebe of Nigeria. He asked at one moment in a gathering such as this, and where are the young suckers that will grow when the old banana dies? Today I'm happy that I can see the young suckers that will grow when the old banana dies. And to the young people, I'm also telling you that we must never make the mistake of rubbishing the legacy of those who lived before you. They will have made mistakes, but your duty is to correct those mistakes. Your duty is to look at the foundation stones that they built and build and correct, because none of us is without fault. It is our duty, therefore, to go out there. It is our duty on an occasion such as this, when we are asking, are we devoted students, to ask ourselves what our ancestors would say today. I am asking you today, you who are South Africans, when Nelson Mandela is up there in heaven, I assume, and is looking down upon South Africa, what questions are Nelson Mandela asking? What questions is he asking? And I hear him asking all South Africans, irrespective of race. When I was here in 1994, when I walked out of prison, did I not say that I have forgiven all of you? He's asking, have we forgiven one another? I hear Nelson Mandela asking, did I not fight that we may have justice? And he's asking, is justice with you today? I hear Nelson Mandela asking, did we not gain independence, that our young men and women should be employed? And he is asking, are they employed? I hear Nelson Mandela asking. I hear Nelson Mandela asking, why are you killing yourself in the taverns? I hear him asking. I hear Nelson Mandela asking, was it not the divine instruction that you should be your brother's keeper? Why is rape rampant in this country? I hear Nelson Mandela asking. And he's not the only one who is asking. I hear Robert Mangaliswa Sobukwe asking. I hear Chris Hani asking. I hear Winnie Madikizela Mandela asking. They are asking you these questions, and I want you to give me an answer. Give me an answer. Are they asking in vain? Could it be that they are asking and saying it was better while we waited? Do you want them to say that it was better while we waited? They are charging us. Those questions should not depress us, but they should energize us. They should tell us that there is work yet to be done. So today, fellow Africans, we are assembled here because we want to be devoted citizens. We are assembled here in a sanctuary where the word of God is spoken every so often. And I feel the Spirit telling us that something must be done, that when you leave here today, it must never be the same again. And when I remember that, I remember throughout the ages that what has distinguished humanity is the question of leadership. Leaders who rise up, leaders who come up and sacrifice all and say to themselves that we shall indeed rise to ensure that our circumstances will change. You know, when we talk about leadership today, we must ask ourselves certain fundamental questions. Who is a leader? Because we live in a world today where there are men and women who, by dint of occupation of public office, think that they are leaders. But many of them are not. Many of them are misleaders. And there is no shortage of such men and women both in this continent, in this country, and the rest of the world. And it is incumbent upon us to realize that when our circumstances have been captured by men and women who are merely pretending to be leaders, then we will never realize what we desire. And what we desire is that justice must be done for all. What we desire is that the promises that have been made to us throughout the ages must be fulfilled. What we desire is that our dignity as human beings must never be undermined. What we desire is that we must give meaning to the words of the carpenter of Nazareth, that we are not children of a lesser God. What we must desire is the recognition, and this has been recognized throughout the ages, that we must be our brother's keeper. What we must desire is to ensure that we live in a world where we are judged not by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character. That is what we desire. And we are gathered here today, therefore, to remind ourselves that throughout the ages, men and women have always realized their potential when there was clarity in their mind. We cannot afford to be of two minds. You who read the Bible will remember certain iconic moments in the Bible when the leaders are called upon to lead and the led are called upon to provide leadership in their own way. When you go out today, I want you to remember the story of that man called Elijah. You remember him saying to the prophets of Baal, and telling them the time has come that we must choose in order to move in the right direction. And he calls all of them and he says, let us not be of two opinions. If God is God, worship God, and if Baal is God, worship Baal. I am today telling you that when you want to be a leader, you must be able to recognize what direction you are going to face. You cannot afford to be of two minds. I can also remember in the book of the prophet Joshua, which you are aware of, Joshua assembling all the host of Israel and asking them, choose you now whom you shall serve, whether you shall serve the Lord, the gods of our ancestors before we crossed the river, or you shall serve the gods of the Amorites in whose land we sojourn, or you shall serve the Lord. As for me and my house, we have chosen to serve the Lord. Today I'm telling you that we must make choices. We must make choices and make the right choices. And you know, when I listen to the Reverend talking about those who ask him whether there is a distinction between being a pastor and being a person who is looking at the affairs of man, there is no distinction between church and politics. Church and politics are Siamese twins. Because the last time I checked, the divine instruction is that we must eat. And eating is a political issue. The last time I checked, I discovered that we must have water, and water is a political and a spiritual issue. The last time I checked, we must go to the toilet, and that is a political issue and indeed also a biblical issue. The last time I checked, there is nothing that is in the Bible which is not a political question. It is therefore the duty of a pastor to be as political as politics can be. Because before we go to heaven, we must eat. Before we go to heaven, when we are sick, we must go to hospital. We must do that. So today, I'm here before you to remind every pastor, wherever they are, every man of God, that one of your greatest vocations is to be a politician. The question is, what kind of a politician? That is the only question. What kind of a politician? What kind of politics? Because there is politics and politics. And the politics that we are talking about is the politics that will liberate our countries and will liberate our minds. When I remember the history of this country, I can still remember during the dark days of apartheid, I remember the voice of Desmond Tutu bellowing from the pulpits and telling the architects of apartheid that we cannot delude ourselves by pretending that we are singing hallelujah while our kith and kin are being judged on the basis of the color of their skin. We must sing hallelujah in the recognition that our duty is to be our brother and sister's keeper. Was Desmond Tutu a man of God and a politician? He was both, and he had to be both. I can still remember the voice of Alan Bussack beaming from the pulpit and saying, behold, we must fight the injustices. And I can still go and remember the voice of Christ himself telling those who are standing in the way of fairness and justice that it is incumbent upon us to be politicians. So today I'm inviting all of us to be politicians. I'm inviting all of us to be politicians because it is only when we are politicians who believe in certain virtues that we can liberate our countries. Because history has demonstrated not once, not twice, but times without number, that when we abandon our political duties, when we are not devoted citizens, there is no shortage of men and women whose only desire is to devour us. It is our duty to stand in their way. It is our duty to deny them the oxygen that they need to survive. It is our duty to tell them unequivocally that we shall not allow you to run roughshod over us. It is our duty to remind them that you cannot normalize the absurd. It is our duty to remind them that they cannot be greedy to our detriment. It is our duty to remind them that we cannot allow ourselves to be led by men and women whose only claim to fame is that they are greedy beyond measure. It is our duty to remind them that we have a duty to make this world a good world for everybody else. It is our duty to remind them that whenever we have fought slavery, whenever we have fought colonization, whenever we fight neo-colonization, whenever we have fought apartheid, we wanted our lives to be lived in a manner that was dignified. We must remind them. So today, we are here to remind ourselves that we must be leaders of ourselves, because we have learned over the years that is only when you lead yourself, when you cleanse yourself, that you can be a good leader. You know, sometimes, and many are those times, when I read the story in the Bible and I read about Jesus of Nazareth, and I wrap my mind about his humility, and I hear him many times saying that he did not come to be served, but he came to serve. Then I look at our leaders who, when they are seeking to serve us, and it's not only in South Africa, it is almost everywhere in the Bible, when they are seeking our support, their humility personified. They kiss babies. They go to the shebeen. They drink from dirty cups. They walk on foot. They smile with us. take photos with everybody. They discard their security, their humility personified. They speak the language that we want to hear. They do the thing that they think we want to see them do. They delude us, they cheat us, and somehow we accept that they are leaders. But immediately they get what they want, or they have a reverse Pauline conversion. If they were Paul, they go back to being Sauls, and we can no longer recognize them. When you ring them, their phones are picked by somebody called a PA, whose only claim to fame that he is rude beyond measure. When you go to the offices, they no longer want to see you. When they are driving in the streets, their sirens scare you. While I suspect that those who discovered the siren meant that it should be used for good purposes, for them it is a badge of honor, and they harass us in the streets. They acquire things which they have not worked for. They want to be described as honorable even when they are horrible. These are the men that we have. And there is no shortage of such men and women in the African continent. They promise us things that they know they will never deliver, and we believe them. I am today telling us that a devoted citizen must have eyes that can see such individuals. Because who is a devoted citizen? A devoted citizen is a citizen who is aware of his or her circumstances. A devoted citizen is a citizen who is going to sacrifice for the sake of this generation and generations yet to be born. This country has had devoted citizens. Nelson Mandela was such a devoted citizen. Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe was such a devoted citizen. Chris Hani was such a devoted citizen. And I know that there are many others who are devoted citizens. Winnie Madikizela Mandela was such a devoted citizen. Albertina Sisulu was such a devoted citizen. And many Tirongo Pose was such a devoted citizen. There has been no shortage of devoted citizens in this country, both known and unknown. And that is why this country is iconic. I remember when I talk about devoted citizen, when I was a young graduate, when I was a young high school student, even when I was a primary school student, I remember history teaching me about the Sharpeville massacre, when men and women came out and they feared nothing and they were prepared to die, and some of them died that you may live. I remember in 1976, young primary school children dying that you may live. I remember many great South Africans spending their time in jail, suffering that you may live. The question now, are you devoted citizens? Or you have become champagne revolutionaries whose only claim to fame is that you want to eat bacon in the morning and to have caviar at lunchtime, and to have lamb chops in the evening and punctuate it with wine, and then you say, behold, I'm a revolutionary. That is not revolution. Revolution is about recognizing what must be done, and that it must be done with devotion, and it must be done consistently, and it must be done in a manner that is going to save the continent of Africa. That is what we are talking about. That is how I understand it, and I am of the view that this country and this continent must do it. Today, many times when I think about my continent, this continent of Africa, this mother continent, this continent that is the cradle of human civilization, this continent that has known abuse by the slavers, this continent that has been colonized, this continent that has known neocolonization, this continent that has known apartheid, this continent that is the home of all minerals known to man, this continent that is the home of rivers that produce waters, this continent that has over 1.4 billion, this continent which is great in prospect, but this continent which is at the lower rungs of the ladder, this continent, I think of her, where are our leaders? How can it be that in the 1940s we fought that we may drive out the colonizer, and the colonizer is coming back again? How can it be? How can it be that 60 years ago we regained our independence and our young men and women are now fighting to go to the land of the colonizers? How can it be? How can it be that 28 years ago you slew the giant that was apartheid, but there is still apartheid of an economic kind? How can it be? How can it be? And how can it be that we are comfortable in that environment? How can it be? It cannot be right. How can we claim that we are devoted citizens when those realities confront us on a daily basis? How can it be? I hear cries across the continent of Africa. I hear cries from Dakar in Senegal. They are asking, how can it be that we cannot feed ourselves? They are asking in Dakar. They are asking in the Gambia, how can it be? The same question is asked in Sierra Leone, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Benin, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Sudan, in South Sudan, in Somalia, in Mozambique, in Botswana, in Lesotho, in Eswatini, in South Africa. They are asking, how can it be? How can it be that every other civilization comes to our continent and takes away that which they desire and leave us in deprivation? They are asking. They are asking, how can the world order be of such a nature that the French can come here and do what they will and go away without consequence? They are asking, how can the British come here and do what they will and leave without consequence? They are asking, how is it that the Americans can come here and do what they will and leave without consequence? They are asking, how can the Turks come here? How can the Arabs come here, do what they will and leave without consequence? And they are asking, why? How can the Chinese come here and they do what they will and leave without consequence? They are asking, how is it that the world order is arranged that when we of the African continent appear in world bodies, whether it's the WHO, we have no vaccines when we are sick. When we appear at the United Nations, we can vote all we want, but a single European country can veto all our votes and neutralize us, giving meaning to the unfortunate situation that we are indeed lesser human beings. How can it be that when they meet as G7 and decide for us, we are not there unless we are invited for a photo opportunity? When they meet as G20, we are not there unless we are invited for a photo opportunity. How can it be? How can it be? Where are our leaders, we ask? How can it be? Where are our leaders in all these? What are they doing about it? What are we doing about it? What must we do about it? Why is it that we have leaders and we cannot feed ourselves because there is a war in Ukraine? How can it be? How can it be that when we have COVID, the claim to fame of our political leaders is that they become multimillionaires and we don't have vaccines? How can it be? How can it be that we have hostels and all equipment is imported from other civilizations. How can it be? How can it be that we have schools in which we have no faith? How can it be that even our airlines fly aeroplanes that are made by other civilizations, and we cannot even run them? How can it be that a matter that is not rocket science, such as the provision of electricity, whether you are in Johannesburg in South Africa, or Abuja in Nigeria, or Accra in Ghana, or Nairobi in Kenya, or Bujumbura, or Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso, we cannot provide electricity for our men and women? How can it be? How can it be that we have all the 33 currencies in the world, with the rand, with the metal, with the shilling, with the naira, with the cedi, with all dollars, and those currencies mean nothing? The only currency that we accept as hard currency is the American dollar. How can it be? How can it be that when I travel to Africa, the only credit cards that I have are the Visa and the MasterCard and the American Express, and that we have no card of our own? How can it be? How can it be that today, when I am traveling across Africa, and yet we have leaders, when I'm in Nairobi, Kenya, or in Kampala, Uganda, when I go to a supermarket, there is no supermarket that is our own. I buy from Carrefour, which is French. And when I bought something from Carrefour, which is French, and I bought Kenchik, which is American. And when I want to move, I move in Uber, which is American, or Bolt, which is Estonian. And when I want it to be delivered to my house, it is delivered to me by Glovo, which is Spanish. And when I want my house to be guarded, it is by Gardewald, which is Canadian. Where are our leaders? These are the questions that I'm asking. How can we possibly be comfortable in such a situation? How can it be that in many African countries the unemployment rate is anything between 35 and 80%? Our young men and women are graduating from institutions, but they have nowhere to go. How can it be? Because we are exporting all our jobs. How can it be today that all our manufacturing is happening in China? When I want a flask, the Chinese give it to me. When I want pepper, the Chinese give it to me. When I want a pen, the Chinese give it to me. When I want a pencil, the Chinese give it to me. And when I want shoes, the Italians give it to me. When I want shirts, the Belgians give it to me. When I want watches, the Swiss give it to me. When I want water, the Americans give me Dasani. When I want a cold drink, the Americans give me Coca-Cola. What has happened to us? These are issues that we must wrap our minds around, because history has demonstrated times without number that she is only capable of aiding those who are willing to work. I remember that day, courtesy of history.
He is asking very thought-provoking questions. Why would you westernize Africa? Why would you make Africa look like the West? In Africa, we are looking for Africa. You who is an African who does not like to be yourself, you got a problem, and you've got to work on yourself. Africa was built for Africans, but we are so welcoming. We accommodate so many of other races. We are so accommodating. The problem is that when we want to leave, you refuse. When you come into our countries, you come with your own cultures. We are quick to throw our own culture and accept another culture. But that other culture is smart. They don't throw their culture to accept yours. Why do we feel inferior with our own cultures? This is why I like Black Americans. The Black Americans really remind us Africans of what we are missing. They really remind us, okay, now I want you to look at Africa in this perspective. That is how Black Americans teach us. When you see them talk about Africa, they are so excited, they are so happy. But we who are living in Africa don't see it as that. It is until you see an image in a different perspective is when you understand some meaning. Not only the one-dimensional perspective, which is often dangerous, you know. I like that Plo Lumumba was able to introduce how perspectivism, how loss of culture will eventually bring Africa into its ruins if we don't take control. Hey, wait, we have a positive change. We have people making positive changes all over Africa, the leaders. Look at the Sahel. Look at Burkina Faso. Look at Mali. Look at Niger. These people are really fighting hard to show that indeed we can. In fact, they wanted to ban French as the national language and use their own. The only reason we are using these languages is because we don't have a common language, you know. Why don't they use our traditional languages in their countries? Why do we use their traditional languages in ours? Why is it in America they don't use Swahili? Why must we use English here? Some questions you ask yourself, you become wise. Be someone who is, you know, those things which you believed in the past. It's high time you throw them outside. Start picking them one by one. Like apples. You've picked all the apples, thrown them down. It's you to pick one by one so that you don't gather any rotten apples. It will spoil the rest which is good. This is the perspective of an African telling an African story in Africa. Yes, we've had so many people doing the same also. People like Wodemaya. I applaud him so much. By any chance you stumble on this video, I really admire your work, Mr. Wodemaya. You really do a nice work. Yeah. And guys, this is EFK Original Documentaries. You've gotten the message. You've understood the message. I have made you see the truth. I have made an attempt to bring change into this world. What attempt have you made to bring change in this world? Subscribe and share this video. Give a super thanks. I shall so much appreciate. See you in the next one.